But now let's focus on the form. And for this, I will already select the form element here for styling, because I already did add the form here, to give that some dedicated style as well. And here I'll give that form a width of, let's say, 40 rem, and a margin of auto to center it, and then also a background color of white, so that we can see it against the background, though we don't see anything at the moment because I have no content in the form. So if I temporarily add the form, so just some text in there, we can now see that here. Now, as a next step, I also want to change that white a little bit and go into the bluish area here as well, and use a darker blue, but still only a tint of blue here, so that we just barely see that blue. Like this maybe. We can fine-tune this later. Next, I will also add a padding here, so some internal spacing between the border and the content of this form. And I'll add a box shadow, so a little drop shadow behind that form. And here a box shadow with 0 distance on the x-axis and 2 pixels on the y-axis, as well as a blur.2 should form routes. Now, as a next step, let's populate this form with a color.
What's the purpose? Oh my god. What's the purpose of the 4 attribute label output? What's the purpose of the 4 attribute label output? It replicates the label element and both times that is provided as an attribute, which required to successfully submit the form of add and need to the element. It required separate assistant technologies and use label programs to achieve perfect. What's the purpose of the 4 attribute label outputs? how the form will be set. Action controls the target address URL. Method controls whether the form should be validated or not. They configure how the form will be submitted. Method controls target address. Action. Target HTTP method get or post. What does form validation mean? It means that the form will be submitted once the submit button inside the form is pressed. What does form validation mean? Of the form element. It makes a web form barrier in order to display the element. It makes a web form barrier. Which form element is the most versatile one? Input. Which key attribute should you always add working with an input element? Which key attribute should you always add working with an input element? Type. Yeah, right? It's type. What's the purpose of a form label? It describes the expected input and hence helps the user fill. What's the purpose of the for attribute on the label? For attribute on the label is required to let assistive technologies know. What's the difference between a radio button and checkboxes? Radio buttons allow for home, checkboxes allow for flexible. What does form submission mean? Form submission means the entry input values are collected and sent to some backend server that might then store them in a database or create tables with that data. What do the action and method attributes on the form element do? Action control views. Can't focus right now. What does form validation mean? Perfect.
Now regarding the inputs that we want to this form has various elements and also various sections into which we can group these elements in the end. For this, here inside of this form element, I'll remove this dummy text and instead add a new section with that section element here, and then add a title where I'll say how can we help you, because after all it's a contact form. And then here, we first of all want to get some basic information about the user, and then of course the message that the user wants to send us, which answers the question how we can help. And for this, I'll render an unordered list of inputs, which are related because they all belong into this section, where every input has a label and then the input element itself. And that's of course the same pattern we used in this module. After all, this is the practice project for this module. So here for the first input, we can add a label where we say your name, and below that add an input of type text with an ID of username, for example, and with a name attribute, which holds this identifier that can be extracted on the server when the form is submitted, something we'll do later in the course, which could also be username. But it can also be a different value, it doesn't have to be the same as the ID. Now you did learn that labels should be connected to inputs with help of that for attribute. Which points at that ID of the input to which the label is related. So in this case, user name, since that's the ID of the input to which this label belongs. Like this. Then I'll add another list item here, like this. And there will basically have the same format, so I'll copy that label input combination. But here I want to get the email address of the user. So we could say your email address, and the type of the input therefore is email. And therefore, of course, the ID and the name value also should be different. Here we can also use email in all these places, or any other identifier of your choice. Then we also want to get the phone number here, so I'll copy that list item and add another label input here, where we say your phone number. And here we can use input type we have not seen thus far. We haven't covered it up to this point. And therefore, if you did not use that type, that's of course no problem. But maybe you also saw that type in the IDE autocompletion or in MDN. There is detail type, which we can also assign to inputs to display an input which is optimized for phone numbers, which matters especially when we visit and use this form through a mobile phone. Then on a smartphone, we will get a keyboard that makes entering phone numbers easier. That's why this tel type is important. And then here we can use phone as an identifier. And as you see here, I will always use the same value for name and ID, though you could also use different values. Now then I'll add one last list item here, and that will actually then be the actual message the user wants to send us. So I'll say your message on the label and target an element, an input element with an ID of message. But here, I will not use a regular input element, but instead the text area element, which is the proper element for longer text that's entered. And here you learned that unlike the input element, the text area element is not self-closing, it's not a void element. Instead, you have an opening and a closing tag here. And that is just something you have to remember. And then we can give this an ID and also a name, of course, like this. Now, with that, I'll then add a second section in this form, because now we got those basics, we got that basic data. If you recall that finished version which we want, which I showed you in the last lectures when I gave you that challenge, there we did not just fetch this basic information, but we also want to find out how the user found us. And we want to get that reply to that question with help of a dropdown. So therefore, here in this section, I'll add another label. Where I say, how did you find us? And then I'll not use an input, not use a text area, but instead create a dropdown with help of the select element here. And then you learned that select works such that you have various options inside of it. And every option can have a human-readable text between the opening and closing tag, and a machine-readable value, optionally, with the value attribute. And here I'll use both. I'll give this a value attribute where I say search, and a human-readable text of web search. And then I'll add another option here, where I set the value to word of mouth, and also use word of mouth here. And last but not least, add another option where I set the value to other and say other here. Here as a human-readable text. Now, just like the other input elements, input and text area, select also gets a name, which then would be used on the server side to extract that selected value, and also an ID to select it to the label. So here I'll just use channel as a name, and also ID as a channel as an ID, I mean. And for the label, we set the for attribute and point at the channel therefore. And that's it for this second section here, where we did add this dropdown. Now we got a couple of other sections left here. One section with radio buttons, where users can select how we should contact them. One section with the label text is definitely not. not submitted, and hence without the value attribute here, nothing would be sent to a server. So we absolutely want that, and here I'll use phone table, and then I'll copy it. Now I'll add e, which could be accept terms, and it's this ID at which we now point with that. It's now time to
action and a div. Alright. Oh no, I have this backwards. What the fuck?
Practice what we learned. And for this, I want you to build this form. As always, if the colors are different, that's not the main focus. You should just try to generally build this form and come as close to that with that for attribute. So we're doing the same thing over and over again in the end, and that is very common, of course, when you're building forms, because after all, you are just dealing with a bunch of user input. And now last but not least, here in this form, I'll add a last section with challenge can achieve this, and here it does submit.
Okay. So that's like that. Fuck. Why this should work?
submit that form. But with all that added, we wrote a bunch of HTML code, and now we got this form. It's not pretty, but it's there, and it also uses it. That it's submitted. Let's start with the form submission and validation. The form is submitted, you go to this form element. It should be submitted, or to the path after the URL by which that form is being served, to which the form should be submitted. And the method then is set to get or post. Now you did learn that post is actually the value you want, but it doesn't work without a server side that is prepared to handle post requests. And since we don't have such a server side yet, since we have no code on the server side that would handle post requests, we'll stick to get for now. And for the action, I'll just enter /challenge here so that the form is submitted to this current subfolder, so to that path which is responsible for serving this HTML file. If you did use other values here, that doesn't matter too much, since form submission isn't really the focus of this task anyways, since that server-side part is missing. Which kind of add the required attribute to all those inputs. It should be empty. It's up to you which kind of rules you want to add, but I think it's fair to say that we definitely want to require all those fields. None of those fields should be empty. And therefore, we need to add the required attribute to all those inputs.
Oh yeah, I did that. Nice.
This is a Boolean attribute, as you learned, so the existence of it alone is enough. And if it does exist on an element, this element is required. So a user needs to enter a value here. Submitting this input in an empty state is not allowed. And therefore, required is definitely an attribute I'll add to all those inputs, and also to the text area, also to the drop down, though there, one value is selected out of the box from the start automatically. Nonetheless, we can still add it to the select element as well. And also add it to all those radio buttons here. And then you learned that only one of them has to be selected to fulfill this criteria. And I'll also add it to this checkbox field. We can only submit this form if the user did accept the terms. But you can, of course, add more rules.